the last sermon that we got while we were members of LCG was a headquarters sermon from Weston. And he literally said, why should we help the world now when they're all going to burn?
The World Tomorrow. The Worldwide Church of God presents Herbert W. Armstrong.
And I'm here to bring you the truth. No one else is telling you the things that God is telling you through me. He's speaking through me.
The Lord let me experience what it is to be a new bride. You know, I'm not worried about what I'm about to say, though it may be graphic. We're coming to the Lord, and if you can take it, beyond the veil is the chamber. That's the wedding chamber. The Lord told me that.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cult Next Door podcast. I am Maddie Lester, as always, joined by my sister Ashley Teeter. Before we get started with today's episode, I want to remind everyone to follow us on our socials, so Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, post a lot of good stuff there, Reels and other posts and things, and announcements. Also want to do our double portion club shout outs, Chase and Shanda, Heather Bartlett, and Carla. Thank you all for supporting the podcast. Speaking of supporting the podcast, if you would like to sign up on our Patreon, you can get ad-free episodes to all paid members. So it's $5 a month to support the podcast and listen to ad-free episodes, or you can upgrade it to $10 a month, get those ad-free episodes and the double portion club shout out. I will also send you a holographic Cult Next Door sticker. I think we posted that on our Instagram. I should probably do that again to remind everyone. It's pretty cool. I have it on my car, and other people put it on their water bottle and computer and other stuff. It's a pretty cool little sticker of the door logo that we have. And without further ado, let's listen to Ashley and Seth, part 2.
Now, I grew up doing a lot of work parties and stuff. My mom would organize those. I joined up with lots of groups to do work parties, all this kind of stuff. I was very big into outreach. That message was unusually explicit, but it was the message that we had always heard.
Yeah, we were never involved in our communities, at least not in any of the organizations I was in, Worldwide Living. And it was, we had the Joplin tornado. You know, which just basically mowed through half of our city, and so many displaced people and just the wreckage of all of that. And, you know, I was no longer affiliated with LCG at that point. I had since left, but they had this big church building that they owned. And I just was like, okay, so you guys literally are not opening that up for anybody or trying to get resources to anyone. And I did ask someone about that. And they said, you know, like they were taking care of the brethren, and, you know, there were a couple of members that were impacted, and they took care of them. And that was like their concern.
During the big tornado that hit Mayfield, Kentucky, we weren't living at the time, but the next morning, we had, I think by noon the next day, we had gathered about $50,000 of donations here, and we drove up chainsaws and generators and fuel and food and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And LCG's response to that, now it took us less than 24 hours to get about $50,000 of donations. LCG's response was to go through their subscriber lists and send an email to anyone on the subscriber list. And they offered them, if they were a subscriber, they would send them a check for $200. And that was their extent. And that only came after a lot of people were asking, like, hey, can we go do something? That's one thing, you know, especially being this a podcast. I don't want anyone to think that I'm putting all of this on the membership, even the friends that left us and everything. This is a structural problem. And
100%.
There are still some wonderful people wrapped up in the middle of it. And I would go as far as to say there are some wonderful people doing horrible things.
Mm-hmm. Well, the indoctrination starts with, this is God's true church, right? Yeah. So once you establish that foundation, there is no other path. It's just this. Right. And so then you really have no choice. If you believe that, you have no choice than to fall in line and do what's expected. Otherwise, your eternal salvation is on the line. At least you think it is. Yeah. And so you trust the ministry, you just like trust that this God is leading and it's all going to work out in the end. Because I've heard that a lot too. Like my dad was like, well, we'll work it out in the kingdom. I just like want to scream. I'm like, okay, so right now you are going to cut me off from everyone I love. And my solace, like the thing I'm supposed to hang on to is like someday in the kingdom, if I get to be there, like then we're going to be family.
It really hurts me to see people that I still very much like and love, just trapped in this very nonsensical place. I really, really hope that more people come out. And I don't have a podcast like you do, but I do everything I can to lay some breadcrumbs out. And it's very difficult because if you try to help someone out, you're fulfilling an internal prophecy. Like and there's a few people that I'm working very hard on right now, and all I can do is say, oh, what if you read this unrelated story? There's of all things, like Animal Farm is a good short read where you can just see that, hey, this is kind of interesting. And if you can get those plots kind of into your head where you can interchange names and characters. I sent someone last week. I just sent her on the Armstrong website, Armstrong Library, I guess. I just sent her a link to about 8 different articles where they say the opposite thing back and forth, depending on, context. These were about the structure of government. And it's funny, when the minister is justifying why he left, there's no organization in the Bible. When other ministers are leaving his church, there's all the organization in the Bible, and back and forth.
Yeah.
The only thing that I think I can help with is just to contemplate things outside of the cult. Just to show that there is a world outside of this really small bubble. It's amazing what one layer outside of that can do. This will be a great story for a short. I had a big lifted Ford van, big 12-passenger van, and I hand painted shark teeth on the front of it, and I had on the rocker down on the bottom of the van, I had a bomb, a vinyl bomb for each one of my kids. We've got 6, and then we had lost 2, so there's got 6 big black bombs and 2 little red bombs, and then we had Zane. So I just got this long line of bombs. In all of the stuff through 21 and 22, when I'm getting in trouble for stuff, the minister made me take all of that stuff off the van. At the time, I had no idea why, and he wouldn't explain why. And it was only after I was out when I realized what was actually going on. And it was literally just punishment. It was just trying to get me back into control. I see people still in it who are being put through the same thing. A good friend of mine was he was a deacon, and his daughter and brand new son-in-law had gone with this new church, and they were in town visiting, and the pastor made him walk his own granddaughter out of the building, and he did it. And I see things like that still happening, and that's just it's the most despicable form of control. We have all of these internal justifications for it, but there is no valid justification for that. There's no good reason to disassociate with your granddaughter. Like, that's just not a real thing. But it happens all the time. I think about, in the first season where you're talking about your dating life, and that same kind of thing just happens to this day. And it's absolutely horrible.
It is. And, one of the things that you mentioned when you first reached out to me had to do with financial and economic abuse, which we haven't even touched on, but
we should get into that.
You made a really good point that they are basically perpetuating generational poverty.
Yes, very much so. So obviously, third generation, we grew up with first, second, and third tithe. And my family was a little bit out of the ordinary that we didn't send third tithes to headquarters. We actually used it in the community, mostly the church community, but a good bit outside as well. We had a new member one time, and Tabby and I were in third tithe year, so we went and we took him to a store and we bought suits for him. So we just used it for that sort of thing, or helping people get to the feast or whatever. But I had started a business right before I got married, and first year of business is you're never going to get rich. We were pretty poor, and I think the second year of business was the third tithe year. That was very difficult, and we got into the habit of taking loans out to pay tithes, because
that's 30%.
Yeah, 30% is a lot of money, especially at the time. I think that year we probably made $30,000 or $40,000. And there's just no extra. Tabby and I were, for the first 2 years we were married, we pretty regularly bought groceries with change. The change jar on the counter. We learned to eat really, really light. And we regularly, for years and years and years, had to take out basically capital loans on the business just to have some money to pay tithes. And that will destroy you. That'll financially destroy you, because there's no... You take out a loan when you have at least the hope, if not the promise, of income in the future, above and beyond that amount. And we never did. As we wanted a family early on, so we have a lot of mouths to feed, and 30% of the money it doesn't work. And early on we were taught to tithe gross. And in my adulthood I didn't do that. I only tithe net, but that's still a lot, and it still hurts.
And you just can't catch up.
You never can.
How do you catch up?
We were always in debt, and if it weren't for generosity of other people, we would have been bankrupt probably our fourth year or 5th year into marriage, because it just wasn't possible. One of the things that Tabby talks about, my wife, is we, buying groceries with change and whatnot. We never had napkins or paper towels or anything like that. We didn't have snacks in the house. But when we would go to a minister's house, they had paper towels. That's a very, very big deal to her. She gets very emotional thinking about the fact that they had paper towels the whole time. Armstrong had gold-plated silverware in Pasadena. There's
private jet. I mean, it's just endless.
Those aren't cheap. I don't know if you've looked into that. That's
and then every world leader, he's handing them a $10,000 Steuben crystal,
right?
And then there are people who don't have electricity in order to pay for that.
And at the same time, while not helping, while the minister class has, their 2 cars and their paper towels and their salary, they will go out and they will have the goal to counsel fathers to leave their jobs before the feast and just trust God. That's bordering on criminal. That's a horrible thing to go tell a father who has children and mouths to feed that he should forego that responsibility and just hand that over by quitting his job.
And people did that.
People do it all the time.
That. Yeah.
I have some very good friends, and this is not quite to the same level. She was going to school to be a nurse, and her finals were on a holy day or something. And she was being counseled to just drop everything for that. Nursing school's not cheap. You've put years and years into this, and you're going to throw that away. That is a horrible thing, and people do it all the time. The apocalypse and the imminent threat of the tribulation starting, we have had that used on us to not get married and to not have kids, and these are absolutely horrible things, and they have no theological justification whatsoever. You have to do some serious gymnastics to make a scenario in which that's theologically sound.
Yeah, Ryan and I were literally just talking about this last week, that Armstrong has been saying from the very beginning of Worldwide Church of God that the end is imminent. And how are they still believing that all these years later? I remember RCM saying, this is going to happen in my lifetime. And he was an older man. And I was just like, oh my goodness, should we have a third child? It's just because woe to those who are with child. So it is amazing to me that, like you said, the mental gymnastics that have to take place to somehow
to justify that.
That now it's time.
Yeah. The toll that takes on people too. In LCG, I'm trying to think of what year this would have been. Probably about 2003, 2002, 2003, maybe 4, sometime around that time period. They had a booklet, not a booklet, but the Bible study course. And I'm very good friends with the man that wrote it all. Mm-hmm. He had done some biblical prophecy calculations, and he wrote this lesson of the Bible study course that said Christ was going to return in 2017. And the ministry headquarters sent a minister to summer camp and actually gave a sermon about that.
What?
At summer camp with to all of the teens.
Oh my gosh.
I don't have to explain what that did to people, that the terror that imposed.
The terror, because, and also I always felt conflicted as a child because I felt guilty because I didn't want the world to end just yet.
Right.
You know,
Yep.
it's like, oh, but I want to experience these things. But then it's like, oh, you shouldn't want that.
Yeah, every teenager in the building was like, no, I want to have sex and have a
Right,
family.
that's right.
Like, I want to be a human. This just
That's abusive. It really is.
I cannot wrap my mind around the logic of bringing that particular topic to summer camp. Like, that's just a wild thing to do.
Don't you think it has to do with just maintaining the membership? You know, because I think that's what the summer camps are for anyway. It's just
absolutely. It's just, I kind of have this wall in my head where it's hard for me to imagine people being so cruel. Like, you know, I've read history of the 20th century. I know people are capable of cruelty, but it's so wild that the majority of the cruelty comes from the most religious.
Right.
In the name of God and in the name of peace and in the name of the future and the kingdom and to claim that the constant claiming that you're more loving than the rest of the world because you're willing to watch them burn, you know, that it's a very, very just mind-blowing thing. And like we've been saying, the further away from it you get, the more comical it looks.
You know, I wonder if that summer camp experience, I mean, what were the long-term repercussions of that? You know, did some of those kids give up on plans that they had for maybe college and career?
Yep. I know some of them did. I don't know to what extent, but.
And again, there we are back to maybe they're not going to be in poverty, but it's still, you know, if you don't think there's a reason to build a career, doesn't have to be college, but if you don't think there's a reason to like build something, build your life, then you're going to be without. You're going to struggle economically.
In my own position, you know, starting a business, and as I previously said, I took the theology very, very seriously. I was a zealot, and I still get, when I meet up with old people, old friends from way back who left, they're like, I wouldn't expect you to not be there. But I didn't want to be in a position, this is the level of my zealotry, I didn't want to be in a position where I owed people money at the second coming, you know. And so I never took any business expansion loans out or anything. I didn't stretch myself at all. And it was specifically theologically based. And so I don't know to what extent other people, you know, did or didn't do things because of that. But I know that it's a sum greater than zero.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think we always know why we are doing every little thing that we do or every decision. It's
Yeah.
just so baked into everything about yourself.
If we
So-
I mean, we know that stress has a very, very, that health in general is tied to stress.
Mhm.
I mean, that accounts for something, but what is being stressed out as a teenager do to you? What is being stressed out as a child do to you? Like, it can't be good.
No. And that, I mean, I don't know what your perception of God was, but I was very afraid of God. So, you know, I always had these fears, like if I don't pray every day, like something bad God is going to allow something bad to happen to me or perpetrate something bad upon me. I wonder if you know, like what your perception of God was.
I didn't have that perception. There was a church friend, an older guy that I've known since I was born. And he used to always get in trouble when I was a kid because he'd start every prayer with "Howdy, howdy, Lord."
So I'd be way too afraid to do that. I mean, this is going back. The reason I brought this up is the stress. You know,
Yes.
I was under a lot of stress all the time.
This guy was probably more influential to me than socially would be expected. But I had a very familiar fatherly perception of God. So okay. I didn't perhaps have that stress, but I was, because my family and later on myself had been in trouble so many times. I was in constant stress of being in trouble with the organization. And I found the organization to not be merciful. There was no soft edge to any organizational discipline. That was another thing with the lack of soft edge or compassion or care and concern. When Tabby and I were getting married, we got in a lot of trouble because we didn't do the pre-engagement counseling, and that's just a wild subject in and of itself. But we got married. We were told we weren't supposed to, but we got married. And our first pregnancy started kind of going bad. Tabby started bleeding one morning, and I grew up around the ministry, and so everybody's got people that they're just more close to. And so we called a very close family friend who is an elder and asked for anointing. And he said no. He said, you have to go talk to your pastor. Well, the pastor was the one that had been giving us literal hell. And then we called a different family friend, and he also said, no, you have to go to your pastor. We're kind of losing it at this point. And that at that time, as many times later, they completely broke my will. And we went to that pastor and got anointed. And we were praised for, being repentant and doing the right thing and all those things. And we still lost that baby. That's there's two people that I haven't forgiven and have no intentions of ever forgiving. But the two ministers that said no,
I'm so
That's,
sorry.
It's neither here nor there now, but I don't see any reason to forgive that.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that just lacks humanity.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure some people will listen to that and say, well, it was God's will that the baby didn't live. You can't blame him for that. But if repentance is, the most righteous thing you can do, and following the government is the most righteous thing you can do, and I did all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And there was nothing to be gained for it. So I am not religious anymore. The last 2 years, as we left CGI, I found too many things. My wife is probably mainline Christian as much as anyone is, but I can't do any of it anymore. I've found too much fault with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the more that I've read, a lot of people when they're having a church trouble, let's say, I've found this to be the case. A lot of people read enough to contextualize their denomination or group and then leave that group or whatever. But very few people continue turning rocks over past that level. And for me, I'm a very curious person by nature and obsessive. So I just kept looking at where concepts came from. And I have perhaps because of my background, I have a very strong aversion to faith in general, because faith, in my estimation, is nothing more than trust me, bro.
Yeah.
And I don't like that. It would appear in my experience that everyone who says trust me, bro, is out to get you.
There's an ulterior motive underneath that.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's been very different.
Was that a crisis for you? I mean, for me, I wanted to believe. And so I thought, I've got to go back down to the foundations. I just need to prove that the Bible is the word of God. And then I can go from there and figure it out. But then I couldn't prove that. I got the old church booklets. I desperately wanted to.
Yes.
I wanted to read something and be like, okay, good. I can at least have that foundation. And so it was a crisis for me for a while to really acknowledge this is not holding up. None of it is, for me at least.
It was very painful. Like I said earlier, I had a very familiar relationship with God. When I started studying the history of canonization, for instance,
yes,
that is a very, very hard thing to justify. And it's even harder to try and justify that within the context of divine intervention, because you have to put divine blessing in the hands of so many enemies as canonization happens. And then you have things, I don't want this to get too much into hating on religion, but you have things like the Book of Job that have our entire understanding. The Armstrong perception of Satan is nothing without that book. And we don't know who wrote that book. We don't know
That's right.
when, where, who. And the church fathers who included it in the canon didn't know where it came from. I have a problem with that. That's that was a very hard thing to get used to. I have a very strong sense of propriety, and I don't fake things. I don't role play or pretend or anything like that. So not having prayer is, I'll give the trolls some food here, but I miss prayer. I really do. But I can't pretend, and I don't want to pretend. And so there's definitely a good amount of crisis involved in leaving religion altogether. One of the things that I found to be a very common misconception, though, I'm not an atheist, and I'm not necessarily a humanist, but that doesn't mean that I'm a hedonist, or you know, I didn't go straight into debauchery or anything. I find that there are, for lack of a better term, there are intrinsic morals to things.
I agree with that. Did you ever watch the show with Ricky Gervais? I think it was
The Afterlife.
Yes. There was
I've seen lots of clips of it.
Yeah, I watched that. I loved it. But, you know, a coworker was like, well, if you don't believe in God, in the Bible or in God, then why don't you just go around raping and murdering as much as you want to? And he's like, I do. She's like, what do you mean? He goes, I do rape and murder as much as I want to, which is not at all.
Exactly. Yeah, I consider myself, you know, accurately or not, a pragmatist. Yeah, things have intrinsic value, and I read a lot of Jordan Peterson as I was coming out. It was very helpful because my family was falling apart, and that it helped with a lot of things. And you know, he wrote to consider yourself as a multiplicity. You now, you a day from now, you a week from now, you 10 years from now, and do things that benefit that whole community. And you know, I don't rape and pillage because I don't want to. It's not a good thing. Nothing good comes from it.
But I think that is such a huge deception that the churches perpetrate on people, that this is where you get your morality, and without it, like, you're just going to descend into absolute debauchery. And I have found the opposite to be true, that my inherent goodness, or which is another concept.
Even. Yeah.
Which is another concept that's hard to even grasp because we were told we were inherently bad. So I've worked so hard to embrace, like, no, like I'm good inside, you know? But I feel like that was only like highlighted or elevated in a sense because whatever I do that may be considered a good deed or kindness, it's because I want to. It is not, it has nothing to do with like I'm storing treasures somewhere that later I'm going to get, or I'm pleasing this entity.
Which
and it's just
that the whole laying up treasures in heaven concept to me is really humorous, because there is nothing more hedonistic.
I know, right? It's like, it says it's easier, you know, for a camel to go through the eye of the needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of God, but we're all going to be like mega, like rich in the kingdom.
Right. That's the dissonance there is really strong. It was a very big deal to not be religious anymore. And it was definitely a crisis.
Yeah.
I think I'm more or less through the crisis stage. I'm pretty comfortable with my position currently, though it's probably going to change over time.
But now you have the room for that. I think that's what this gives.
Yes. And now I have a desire to put things in order. One of my friends in CGI, I tell him I want to go back and give one sermon. And basically, have you ever watched the car show Top Gear?
No.
I don't know. They have this magnetic board, or they used to have this magnetic board, and they'd write the car and the lap times on it, and they would stack up all the lap times of all the hypercars and everything, and how fast did you go around the track. I want to do that, and I've been trying to talk him into doing it. I want to do the same thing with doctrines and ideas, and just have everyone write things that are important, and then take the sermon time for everyone to just bracket everything and start stacking them in order. And I do that in my own life. And I don't feel like, obviously I miss praying, which is a very strange thing to say, but I also, I don't want to be schizophrenic. Like we literally have a diagnosis for when you make an imaginary figure and converse with that imaginary figure. It's not healthy, that something breaks. But I don't find myself to be like wandering in some depraved desert. In my estimation, depraved people do depraved things, regardless of whether or not they're in an organization. Maybe a little less if they're in an organization that punishes them. But I don't know. I'm perfectly happy. I tend to lean towards the reincarnation side. I have my own theory about that. That's worth, the paper that I would write it on. We were taught, and I'm sure you were too, that outside of the truth is just, I don't know, nothing, expanse, horror, terror, being lost, all that kind. Leaving, definitely you experience those things, but that's not the end. And I think the desert that you have to cross coming out is not actually real. It's just that we were never taught how to be human. And so it's not that there is nothing outside of the church, it's that you know nothing outside of the church.
Yeah, and you're trained to be afraid of what's out there, too.
Right. And so, for anyone who's listening to this podcast, where this podcast is maybe just a very slight edge of the Overton window, go read. Just read anything you can get your hands on. Doesn't even have to, you don't have to go read books about cults. Just read about the world. It's a big place. A lot of things have been tried. A lot of things were tried and written down. It's not a horrible place.
That's right. One thing that was eye-opening to me was, I think it was a world literature class that I took one of my first couple years of college, like right after I got married, before I had kids. But that was the first time I had ever really heard, there's a flood story in all of these different civilizations, and you can see these parallels. And we did study the Bible as literature and not in a religious, context. And that was really eye-opening. It didn't change me. It didn't change what I did for the next, 10 years after that, but it definitely shook something loose.
I
in
had
my mind.
A very similar experience reading a recent translation of Gilgamesh. And then just to kind of wrap your mind around the age of that, because that predates the Old Testament by a lot.
Yeah.
And to realize that, oh wait, these concepts are kind of old.
Have you read any of Bart Ehrman's work? Like
I
how
don't think
Jesus
so.
became God?
No, I've studied probably a lot of the literature that he sources.
Like his references, yeah.
Yes, from another writer that I frequent a lot of his videos. There's some very interesting things out there about the history of the Judeo-Christian God. And it's the fascinating thing to me is that it's not no history. There actually is a history.
Mm-hmm.
And it's rather detailed in a lot of places.
Yeah. Yeah. That was really eye-opening for me. That was one of the first books I read, I think, when I was like really ready to dive in and understand. And I was not quite as scared to know or to learn something that might shake me. Because I think at first, I had a lot of fear, just like, I'm afraid of what I'm going to find out. I'm afraid if I read this and I'm not going to believe what I've always believed. And it is like, you talk about the desert that you have to walk through. And you're right. It's like a figment of our imagination in a sense. It's not real, but that is what it feels like. And you have to get through that part of your journey to get to the other side.
The reality is that the next door neighbor that you don't know has a whole life.
Yeah.
Like, he's not an NPC somewhere.
That's right. That's right.
And all you have to do, like that desert when you're leaving your church or your faith or whatever it is literally only as long as the space from your door to your neighbor's door. Now, you can zigzag that 100 foot for 20 years if you want, or you can just walk over there, say hi to your neighbor, say, hi, my name's so-and-so. Do you guys want to come over? That's it. That's the length of that void, from the church's perspective, from the administration's perspective, that's the thickness of that buffer zone that keeps you in. It's very, very short. It's very thin. The space is your own ignorance, not an actual thing.
That's right. And I guess that would probably be your advice. Like, if you were going to leave listeners with anything.
My second to last sermon that I gave in CGI was that. Just go meet people. Walk across the street. Go meet your neighbors. Go talk to them. Figure out who they are. Learn some things about them. You can't be ignorant anymore once you cease being ignorant once you start learning.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of my favorite quotes, what travel does for a person. Like, it really broadens your view of the world, and you just can't stay in the same narrow-mindedness after you go and you see how other people live. And this, in a sense, is obviously closer. It's your next door neighbor, maybe, but it's the same concept.
Yep. And the upbringing, I think the more academic listeners probably don't realize the level at which we were taught that the world does not exist outside of the
That's
church.
right.
Like, perhaps no one ever gave a sermon and said there's no world outside of this. But they might as well have. That was nothing existed.
Now, I was going to say that quote was Mark Twain. Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness.
Yep. Yeah, you can't avoid it. Even for people, I doubt there's a lot of listeners who are, still in churches. But if you're one of those people, there's nothing healthier that I could recommend except for just go meet people. Join a local community. join the Rotary Club or something. Go do something that's not religious, and realize that there are people, and the people outside of the church also have consciences. They have things that they fight. They have things that they are good at. They have questions and concerns. They have fears. They have hopes. They're not all out, having orgies every day. We were taught such that black and white, strong dichotomy that we're righteous, everyone else is not.
If you like this episode of The Cult Next Door, please leave us a positive review and rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And don't forget to subscribe to be notified of new episodes.